Angel is brought to you by Audible, with an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and more. Get a free audiobook with a 30-day trial at audible.com/angelbook.
Hey everybody, welcome to Angel, my new podcast where I talk specifically with angel investors about their process, deal sourcing, negotiating of terms, and generally why they do it, why they are so passionate about investing in companies. Today on the program, I have Angel and Angel Syndicate lead Ed Roman. Ed is passionate about investing, so passionate that he says he's going to do it for the rest of his life. We get into his philosophies of looking at the market and even betting on teams that might not be perfect, might not be the greatest teams in the world, but the ones that are in a colossal market where the product is just drawn out of the startups by a demanding market. A very interesting position. And we talk about the investments he missed and why he missed them and what he learned, as well as getting through your own bias. Every time you invest in a company, according to Ed, you learn something, but you have to be very careful that you're not learning the wrong things and applying them incorrectly. So without further ado, please enjoy this discussion with angel investor and syndicate lead Ed Roman. Hey everybody, it was a pleasure to write this book, and I really hope that some number of people who read it get enough insights that they're inspired to start angel investing. Angel investing is one of the few ways in our society today, here in the 21st century, that a person can create a large amount of wealth and perhaps even move from one segment of financial success to another. In other words, going from poor to middle class to wealthy, wealthy to ultra wealthy, or even from poor to ultra wealthy. I believe that. I'm an example of it, and I've seen many examples of it here in Silicon Valley. It's not for the faint of heart, but it is one of the most exciting jobs, if not the most exciting job you could have on the planet. You get to hang out with the smartest, most innovative people in the world, and you get to place bets on them. At the very least, if you lose all your money, you're going to hang out with the smartest kids in the class, and you're going to have an idea of what the next 100 years is going to look like before everybody else. It's a thrilling position to have in society, to be the person writing the check. And as part of the book, I wanted to bring in some other voices. So you are not, as the person who bought this book, relying just on me and my opinion. There are many different ways to be a successful angel investor, and I'm really pleased to have a conversation now with a good friend of mine, Ed Roman, who runs Hack VC, as in hacking venture capital. And I met Ed here in San Francisco, where he runs a syndicate. We talk about syndicates in the book, collections of micro angels and even proper angels collaborating to fund companies. And Ed, welcome. Thanks for doing this. When did you get into angel investing? How did you become an angel?
So I've been an entrepreneur most of my life, and I've started 3 companies, had a couple of exits. And after the second company, I started to mentor other entrepreneurs and help them learn how to build companies in a reliable way. And as I started to mentor, it became organic and natural for me to angel invest into the companies that I was mentoring. So I was living back in Austin, Texas at the time. Austin doesn't really have a huge startup ecosystem like Silicon Valley does. So I made it my little mission to kind of help that ecosystem to become stronger. And by seeding the local community, hopefully we could produce IPOs down the road and build a more robust community within Austin. Since then, I moved to Silicon Valley, and the rest is history.
So by moving to Silicon Valley, is there a recognition that this is the place you should be angel investing, and that angel investing in one of these smaller markets is just not going to get you access to the deal flow that we'll call the tier 1 deal flow?
I think there's differing opinions on this.
What's yours?
My opinion is that I personally did decide to move to Silicon Valley to get access to just a wider swath of deals. I decided I wanted to make it my job to be a professional investor, and I found that this was the environment in which I was going to be most effective. But I think it's a personal decision, And within other ecosystems, there's actually a lot of success that's recently started to happen. Like, for example, you look at Salt Lake City, Utah. There's companies like Pluralsight, Qualtrics, Domo. These are billion-dollar companies being created outside of Silicon Valley. And this pattern exists in other ecosystems as well. So I believe over the next 10 years or so, you're going to start to see this revolution happening, where within other ecosystems, they slowly start to build up.
So this is the primary place you want to do it as a professional, that being the Bay Area. This is where the most unicorns and certainly decacorns and once-a-decade companies like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Cisco, Apple, Airbnb, and Uber, that was called the $10 billion plus crowd, Dropbox, Palantir, kind of touching into those numbers. Those companies all come out of the Bay Area, and two of them, Amazon and Microsoft, come out of Seattle. We've yet to see the $10 billion companies come out of New York, LA, Austin, and those other secondary markets, Chicago, with the exception of Snapchat, which might actually not be a $10 billion company. We're not sure at the taping of this if that company's incredibly overvalued or, the investors see something that isn't clear. What's the deal flow difference for you in Silicon Valley versus Austin? Is it just the numbers game, or is it also the boldness and the vision?
It's pretty much night and day. So in Silicon Valley, you have entrepreneurs that are actually moving here from other ecosystems, specifically because they want to get access to a larger amount of capital and to be closer to other technology companies that they want to partner with. And so there's this adverse selection problem that you see in other markets where, as an investor in Austin, for example, some of the better startups would actually leave Austin to go to Silicon Valley to raise capital there. And so what I've noticed is that Silicon Valley investors in general are willing to take more swing for the fences hits in terms of the startups that they invest in. And so a high risk, high return type of startup that has the potential for outsized returns in the $10 billion range, that's the mentality that you start to see here in Silicon Valley, where growth is prioritized over all else. In other markets, a slower growth model with maybe a smaller return, maybe a 3x return on capital, that could be seen as a success within that local ecosystem. And so it's just a difference of mentality in terms of making safer bets versus making more risky bets.
And getting a 3x return for you today, if one of your investments returns 3x, do you consider that a success, a push, or disappointing?
It's a good question. So obviously, if you're tripling your money on paper, it's obviously a win from an economic perspective.
Right.
But you can't be chasing companies that are just doing 3x's as a professional investor that's doing startup investing for a living. And the reason for that is because when a startup has an early exit, let's say they're selling for, say, 10 million, 20 million, a relatively small amount of money compared to their full potential, it is in their interests, in the startup's interests, to negotiate a deal with the acquiring company that benefits the acquirer and benefits the startup, but doesn't necessarily benefit the investor. And there are ways to structure those deals where they can benefit those two parties. So, that's one reason why investors sometimes can get washed out with these early exits. What
does it mean washed out? Explain that, and explain why this sort of 2 out of the 3 parties in this formula, the acquirer, the founders, will have a good experience and the investors will have a less than optimal experience.
Well, think about it. Let's say you're a startup company and you've had this grand vision. You want to become $1 billion company. You didn't quite get there. Let's say you sell for 10 million, you find an acquirer. You've worked your ass off for the last couple of years. You've done your hard work. And at this point, the acquirer wants to pay as little as possible, and you want to get as much as possible. So there are knobs and levers that you can pull in those contracts where you could do things like give yourselves an outsized salary when you get hired by the acquirer. You can get signing bonuses. You can get stock options that will vest over years. And none of those things are actually given back to the investors that originally invested in your company. So my theory for investing is that I go for these outsized returns, these large outcomes, and I do not optimize for the downsides. What that basically means is that I'm not trying to negotiate little deal terms where if a company has a small exit that I benefit in some small way. Those types of terms are not important to me to negotiate in those contracts because I know that most of my returns are going to come from 1 or 2 very large outcomes down the road. and that will make up for all the small exits or small losses along the way.
So you don't sweat if a company says, hey, we're selling, you invested at a $5 million valuation, we're selling at 10, you're just going to get your money back, or your money back plus 50%. So your $100,000 is now 150, or you're just getting your 100K back because of the way we structured the documents. We didn't pass the hurdle necessary for you to make a profit. So you can get your 100K back. But by the way, we're going to get 80% of that for the founders and for the team. So the founders are going to walk away with $4 million each. And the founders are now getting $500,000 a year when maybe they would have gotten $250 for the next 4 years. And they're going to get $4 million in Facebook stock for the next 4, each. So there's another, let's call it $10 million in compensation. That's forward looking. So it's $20 million. You wouldn't even bother fighting for that. You just write it off, because what's the best case scenario? You get 50K or 100K back. It would be 50% or 2 times your money. You might as well focus on the big winners.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time that transaction happened, I would definitely urge the founders to be fair to their investors. And it would, as a human being, it would feel pretty bad to me if they totally took the investors to the cleaners. So obviously I am going to push for them to make a fair deal for the investors. And I'm going to raise an eyebrow if they don't do that. And that may affect whether I fund that entrepreneur in the future for any future company that he makes. But when I'm first investing in the company, I'm not going to pass on an investment because there aren't specific deal terms in that investment that optimize for the downside.
And those deal terms would be something like a liquidation preference. I put in 100, no matter what happens, I get 2x in a sale. So therefore, the $1 million that were invested by angels, they're guaranteed to get $2 million minimum back in a sale.
That's right. I'm not necessarily looking for those terms. And the reason for that is if I try too hard to negotiate on those terms, I might miss out on the next Uber by over-optimizing on the downside when my real return is coming from the upside, not the downside.
So if the company loses, you chalk it up to that's how the game works. And you get a little information on the founder, which I like.
Yeah, it's a cost of doing business.
Cost of doing business. And hey, listen, if the founder is petty, or the founder decides to take his investors to the cleaners and do a backdoor deal with Zuckerberg, which I've heard of a couple of these deals happening, specifically with Facebook over the years, where Zuckerberg told one co-investor friend of mine, F your investors. I don't know if it's true, but this is what a pretty credible person told me. Zuckerberg just said, screw your investors. I'll just give you equity, and you can just wipe them out. It was pretty crazy. But that kind of stuff does occur here in Silicon Valley.
Exactly. And I think like the way that I look at the world these days is for these safer bets that may have a smaller return, a 2x, a 3x, where they have the potential to negotiate a deal that does not benefit for investors. That's one of the reasons why I'm not looking for those types of startups to invest in to begin with. I'm looking for the swing for the fences, large potential outcomes. And one of the reasons for that is because I learned over time that for me to give the startup additional fuel and capital to get to the next milestone, it has to be more than just my capital. I have to be able to pull capital from venture capitalists for future financing rounds. And unless the company fits the profile of a startup that could be venture class and could produce $1 billion, $10 billion result, it's going to be very difficult to secure follow-on financing, which almost pushes the company into a small exit type of likely scenario.
So take me through this now. This is a very interesting observation that you're looking for, although you're an angel who could invest in things that go 2, 3, 4x, you're actually thinking like a chess player, maybe 4 or 5 moves in advance. If they get to the next level, a year or two from now with my capital, will a venture capitalist look at this and say, this could be $1 billion company and I can make 10 or 20 times my money? So how do you know when you meet with a founder, take me through your thinking that this company with that's less than a year old with 2 people, how do you know if that one has a venture profile 2 years before it actually has demonstrated it? Or it's a 2 or 3x company. What's your secrets to doing that? I'm curious.
It's a great question. It's very hard to know for sure at the time because your opinions are biased. Your opinions come from your personal background, all the investments you've made, the experience you have as an operator, all that influences how you look at a startup, and that is bias. You could be wrong in your analysis. So it's a combination of 2 things. One is, what does your gut tell you? Have you done the market size analysis yourself to see that this could become a large outcome? And then 2 is, I actually engage with others and I'm a collaborative investor. So other investors kind of shoot from the hip. They look at a company and they decide internally, do I believe in this company? And that's how they make their decision. For me, I actually involve others in that decision-making process. Now, I'm still making the decision ultimately. Others aren't making the decision for me, but I'm being informed by others, which will help inform my decision-making process. And so I actually choose to work with venture capitalists myself to have kind of a VC set of eyes on these deals. And that way, I'm almost like playing that checkers game analogy that you were talking about, 2 steps ahead. I'm validating that it's a venture class deal before I invest by pinging it off of a venture capitalist.
And a venture capitalist would say, hey, I'm not writing 100 to 250K checks. So there's no problem with me giving my insight to an Ed Rome and running a syndicate because I don't operate at that level, but Ed is my feeder. Therefore, I'm happy to give him some feedback and say, yeah, in order for me to invest, this would need to have the ability to have 20, when you get through this, 25,000 customers paying $10 a month each. And that's when it would feel like a venture business to me. They give you where the goalposts are in a way.
That's right. Exactly. And you have to be a little bit jaded in terms of your perspective here because venture capitalists look at thousands and thousands of deals per year and they pass on 99% of the deals that they look at. So just because a venture capitalist doesn't like a startup doesn't mean the startup isn't venture class. It just means that that particular venture capitalist has an opinion about the company that you should take into consideration when you make your investment decision. So that's kind of how I think about the world is how do you look several steps ahead? Let's project whether this company can raise a next round of funding by including others. And by doing that, it actually helps me because those venture capitalists could help get me into their deals, and then they can protect my investments with follow-on capital.
Right. It's a very collaborative sport, isn't it?
It is. It's very collaborative.
How do you decide that you want to syndicate a company or not? And how did you get into syndication? How does that change your behavior, if at all, as an angel investor?
So when I first started angel investing, I made a lot of mistakes. And it's kind of like the price you pay to become an angel investor. The definition of a sophisticated angel investor is an angel investor who's lost money investing. That is the definition of a sophisticated angel investor. And so my first mistake, which will lead into the syndicate answer, is the first company I invested in, I won't tell the name, I put in $10,000 into this company. There were no other co-investors. The company spent the $10,000. Then they went out of business.
Right.
Most bone-dead, simple mistake you can make as an angel investor, right?
You went it alone with a small amount of gunpowder, and you got your head shot off.
That's right.
They bought a couple of laptops. They probably kept them, and the company shut down.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
So lots of mistakes and lessons like that. And then over time, I started to be approached by other angels who were looking for insights and information about how they could avoid those mistakes. So I started to help them, and we started to rely on each other for deals. So we'd send each other deals, we'd help each other out, get into deals. And then sometimes these investors would ask, how do I get into your deals, Ed? And I didn't have a structure to do that, but now I do. So I have this syndicate. It's under the brand name Hack VC. And through the syndicate, investors can join and they can then invest through me, and they share the economics in the upside with me in exchange for that. And it's a great model. It's a way for kind of new angel investors who don't necessarily have all the connections in Silicon Valley to get access to these kinds of startups. And so for me, it's attractive because it gives me better economics than I get as an individual angel investor. By being able to write a larger check, like I've written checks in the $500,000, $1 million range through these syndicates. It's a nice way for me to get into deals that I normally couldn't get into because my check size was too small initially. Like a $25K check.
You're not important enough for the founder to give you attention. It's not personal, but they need to get somebody with 10, 20 times, 40 times the wherewithal.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there are some angel investors who will start off investing like $1,000, $2,000 checks. And if you can get into certain deals, that's great. But what you'll find is that over time, it may not be worth the lawyer's time to even get you into their company.
Right.
And so the syndicate structure allows for that.
And that's what the minimums are about. Typically, you see a minimum if you're coming into a deal of 25K, even 50K. And I've seen people even shoot for the fences and say, if you want to directly invest, it has to be 100K or more. What about the responsibility of being a syndicate lead? Obviously, I'm a syndicate lead myself at Jason's Syndicate. I started at AngelList. Hack VC's still on AngelList.
That's right.
So you're still on AngelList, and there's obviously other places, Funders Club, Seed Invest, a bunch of them. AngelList happens to have the most syndicates, so it's probably the best place to start looking. What about the responsibility? Has that changed how you? I know it had a bit of an effect on me that I had to consider, which is, hey, are people going to blindly follow the guy who did Uber, Thumbtack, Wealthfront, Robinhood, and the fifth unicorn, which I can't announce yet, but I've hit 5 unicorns since the writing of the book, or in total. I think when I wrote the book, there were 3, so there's 2 more that have happened, Wealthfront and one other. I'm not sorry, Robinhood and one other that I can't mention right now at this time. Has it changed your behavior as an investor where you go, this deal is too speculative. I would be comfortable putting 10K of my money in, but I don't know if I want other people to put their 1K in. Does it get inside your head at all?
Yeah, that's exactly how I think, actually, which is weird because as an investor, you kind of have to be a risk-loving personality.
Right.
You have to be able to go with these kind of risky ideas that are swing for the fences, that low potential probability of actually working. But if it does work, it's a huge outcome for everyone. And so when you're investing your friend's money, it becomes very, very challenging because you almost have the social responsibility to give them a return, and your friendship could be at stake. And so there's a lot of parts of me would rather invest anonymously rather than necessarily investing my colleagues' money. But I think by including my colleagues in my syndicate, it actually it creates this diligence process and this accountability where I need to be thorough when I invest in a company and make sure that I'm being responsible with my investing. And so there is a nice check and balance there, which I appreciate.
But truth be told, you would be a little bit loosey-goosey or wilder with your own money, and you added processes. The same experience I went through, which was I have now said, hey, if you want to do the syndicate, jasonsyndicate.com, which is where you can sign up. I tell founders, if you want to do Jason Syndicate, you need to have crossed the 50% threshold in raising money for your company. You have to have a little bit of traction that you can put in a graph of some type. And then that puts you in the zone where you're going to have a good syndicate experience, because a lot of the syndicate people will read the memorandum and say, oh, a chart, I can understand it. Oh, it's going up and to the right, I can understand that. Oh, they're raising $1 million, it lasts for 18 months, and they've got 600K of it, and this is going to be the final 200, and there's 200 after that. So I've kind of come up with my own sort of thinking on it, but I do think I am more conservative when I do syndicate, and I try to be more thorough, try to do more diligence, and I look at the claims by founders, which the claims founders, I don't want to say founders will lie, some will, but founders could, in your experience, tell me if this is true, founders can present information in a light that may not match objective reality.
In my diligence, and I'm pretty thorough, I typically find about 1 fraudulent startup per year that I
Straight
encounter.
Up fraud.
Fraudulent, yeah.
Out of 20.
I look at more than 20 per year.
Okay, so 30 or something.
These are not companies I'm investing in. These are companies that I'm looking at and considering to invest in. So
just outright fraud.
Yeah, I have found about 1 absolutely fraudulent company per year. Now, I am more thorough than most investors, so most investors don't see this. So
take me through one of the cases without talking about the company. Obviously, give me broad strokes of the type of insanity you've discovered, and I'll dueling banjo it with you and give you one of my insane stories.
I found a company once that claimed to have certain customers. I called those customers up. Those customers were fictitious. They didn't exist.
The little names were like Acme, Delta, Gamma, and there's no AcmeDeltaGamma.com.
That's right.
Wow.
Now, this is not normal. Like, if you look at Silicon Valley, most seed rounds, which is the first round of funding that a company gets, that is typically based on trust and conversation,
right,
and almost no due diligence, which is research about the company.
There's not much to diligence.
There's not much
fairness.
Yeah.
So
now, once you get to Series A and later, like the later financing rounds,
you have a document
that's
library.
when there's more diligence. And
there's a document library.
That's right.
They give a data room over.
That's right. But what's happened is there's been a transformation in Silicon Valley where now earlier angel investors like us are investing in companies that actually have traction and have made progress in the market. And there actually is revenue that you can actually diligence. And these rounds used to be called venture capital rounds, Series A financing rounds. Right. They're not called that anymore. They're called seed rounds.
Seed plus.
And seed plus, which is what we do as angels.
Right.
And so it's funny because the financing rounds have been renamed. The angel investors of the world are now investing in companies that have made progress, and yet the diligence is not happening on those companies.
So you have what would have been a venture round 10 years ago, what would have been venture Series A performance is now moved to seed, but the seed people in some cases have not grown up to due diligence.
That's right. And so,
fascinating.
If you make enough bets as an investor, the law of large numbers will take over. And even if you have a fraudulent company in your portfolio, that'll be okay because that'll be a cost of doing business because you'll have one of those outsized returns and that'll make up for everything.
Right. So you might be upset about it. You might be disturbed by it. Yeah. But let's face it, I mean, there is fraud everywhere in the world. 1 or 2% of credit card transactions are fraudulent. But because they chalk those up, they don't make us do a thumbprint and take an iris scan when we're buying a latte. They just swipe your card and they deal with the fact that there might be some fraud at some point.
That's right. Yeah. And so, as an investor, one of the best practices that I've learned over time is I will, just like you, attempt to co-invest in rounds where there are other smart, sophisticated investors who I trust. If one of those investors is a venture capitalist, it helps even more because that will kind of indicate to me that some level of scrubbing and diligence has occurred for this company.
Sometimes you'll have groupthink where they have a party round. Everybody puts in 25 to 50K. There's 20 to 30, 40 investors, and nobody has enough skin in the game to actually do the diligence. You've seen that too.
I have seen that, and a lot of times founders will want that because they'll try to raise at too expensive terms to attract a lead investor, and so that doesn't necessarily mean the company's bad. It could be a great company.
Right.
It could just be the way that the founders are approaching that particular company and their fundraising. So
it's a classic Y Combinator tactic. I'll say that. No, you don't have to, but Y Combinator, a lot of the companies during the height of the madness were raising at 12 or 15 million or uncapped notes, and it was a party round. And the explicit instruction was do not give information, do not give rights to investors. What do you think of these uncapped notes or no information rights or no pro rata? How do you look at a company coming with those kind of, let's say, edge deal terms? We saw it a lot out of Y Combinator. I think people have since pulled back because they felt a little weird. But how do you feel about those?
Yeah, so that's a good question.
Deal breakers?
I would say that for me, I optimize as an investor to get into the best deals, and I'm not as price sensitive as other investors. So for me, I would rather be in the right deal that becomes the next home run than not be in that deal. And it's all about supply and demand. So let's say you're a startup company and you're raising money. The way you set those deal terms is going to dictate how much capital that you raise. If you set the deal terms too high, it might be too tough to raise a round. If you set them too low, you'll get oversubscribed. You'll be turning away money. And so it's an optimization problem that these startups are solving when they put their rounds together. And some of the best entrepreneurs are actually quite dilution sensitive. They value their equity. They think of themselves as owners. They think of themselves as, I'm in this for 5 or 10 years, and my first round of financing that I'm raising is going to be my most expensive round that I'll ever raise for my company because my valuation will be the lowest it will ever be in the future.
It'll be $5 million, and I'm trying to raise $1 million, so I'm giving away 20% for $1 million. But if this company works, and I do another 20% at $100 million, I get $20 million, 20x the value.
Exactly, and that could be a year or two away. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be many, many years away, especially for the fastest growing companies. And so for me, and this is just my personal take on things, is that I'm a market-driven investor. I look at companies that are attacking a big market where the market is pulling the solution out of the company. And the team is important to me, but the market is more important to me than the team. And
Really?
the problem that is being solved is the most important thing for me as well. And if my diligence works and I see that the company actually has a huge chance to succeed, I'll be a little bit flexible on deal terms. I won't over-optimize on it. I won't negotiate over $1 million or so difference in valuation, because being in that deal, if it works, the cost of losing out on missing on the next Uber or the next Facebook is so much more costly than the cost of making an investment in a company that fails, or hopefully not, but a company that's fraudulent. Those are costs of doing business.
Interesting. It's and founders know that today, and we've seen breakout success. So in the balance, it used to be when I was coming up as an entrepreneur, when you were coming up, $2, $3, $4 million valuation was the standard for a seed round, angel round. Now the standard's probably 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's a much different standard today because founders know, hey, these investors, it doesn't matter if they get in at 4 or 8 necessarily. What matters is they get in the deal if we're oversubscribed. And whoever doesn't get in, the Uber round was, I think, 4.5 million or some 4 million pre, 5 million post. And Thumbtack was 4 million. So if those had been 8 and I turned it down, or 10, that would be a disaster for me.
That's right. I mean, if you look like 5, 10 years from now, let's say you make angel investing a primary activity for yourselves, those in the audience listening.
Yeah.
You are not going to remember the companies that fail as much as you'll remember the companies that you did not invest in that succeed wildly.
Okay, so when we get back from this quick break, we're going to go to your biggest misses, the greatest successes, and the frustrating failures. Hey everybody, let me take a moment to tell you about my favorite service. Yes, my favorite app on my iPhone is Audible. I made a commitment in 2017 that I would do 3 books a month, 36 books in the year, not a book a week. That felt a little too ambitious for me, but I've been going for walks every day, trying to hit my 10,000 steps so I'm healthy, and then I'm trying to be smarter and more worldly and more cultured, and that's where Audible comes in. And Audible has a number of great features that you're going to love. Obviously, it's the largest collection of audio content, spoken word content on the planet. It is amazing, the depth and the breadth of this collection. But there are some other key features you should know about. One of them is you can change the speed of the audiobook. Now, most people don't even know this exists, but it's a feature I love because some people speak very slowly and other ones speak very fast. And depending on the content, you may want to go a little faster. And depending on the narrator, you may want to go a little faster or even just a little slower. And that really helps my enjoyment of the book. And sometimes it's just annoying if somebody's really going slow. You can do clips. You can do chapter navigation. You can take notes. I love taking notes in it because I might be on a hike. I don't have my pen and paper with me. I want to take a note. Something I've listened to is actionable. Something I'm going to bring to my startup. Something I'm going to bring to my life. I want to write it down. Boom, you just click it in the notes and it's saved forever. Send This Book is great. You can send a book to a friend or family member and they get it for free if it's the first time they're using that feature. WhisperSync, an incredible feature. You're in your Kindle, and you're in the Kindle app, and you listen to the audiobook and it syncs between the two. So if you want to read for a little bit and then you're driving, it knows where you left off so you can have this great efficiency. Also, I was in my Kindle today looking at my book, Angel, and it was showing me every word I spoke. So when I was in the audiobook reading for my book, Angel, I had to get every word correct so that WhisperSync would sync it perfectly. So it took me a little bit of extra time, I'll be honest. It was hard to do as an artist speaking a book, but it was worth it for that WhisperSync. And you own your books forever. And I've now started listening to books like Good to Great a second time because they're so good and you get this little refresh, right? For your mind and for your business. So go ahead. Here's a great offer for our audience. Audible.com/angelbook, audible.com/angelbook, and you will get a free audiobook, 30-day trial membership. And you can download my book of the week. I'm going to give you 2 books. It's a pairing by the same author. There's Charles Duhigg did a book called The Power of Habit, and it's really good. It's basically how to get that habit loop started so you can be a more disciplined person, right? Self-help, it's one of the big categories. And then he did a follow-up, Smarter, Faster, Better. And it was just 2 books that will change the way you think about your own personal habits and building teams. I very much enjoyed both of these books, and I'm going to interview the author. I could give you a bunch of other books, including my own Angel, or Ender's Game, or The Hobbit, which I'm listening to with my 7-year-old, or option B, Sheryl Sandberg's new book. Homo Deus is the one I'm reading right now, which is the follow-up to Sapiens, which was another great book. There's so many great books. I'm like literally flipping through, and you can see I just have so many great books in here. I mean, it just goes on forever. And what I love to do is sometimes I take a flight. I'm worried I'm going to run out of juice on my phone or whatever. I download them all to my iPad. Now I got my iPad, my earbuds in. I'm doing work. I'm listening to an audiobook. Feels great. Okay, so I could tell you a million different ways why Audible is great, but you know it's great, and you know you want to just go in there right now, audible.com/angelbook, and get that 30-day trial membership. download my book of the week. As we said, the Charles Duhigg collection, Smarter, Faster, Better, and The Power of Habit. 2 amazing books. Audible.com/angelbook. Thanks again to my friends at Audible. Hey, everybody. I'm sitting with Ed Roman, angel investor. His syndicate is called Hack VC. You can find it on angel.co, the Angel List website, and you'll find Ed Roman there. Ed, I wanted to do a quick portfolio review with you. Let's start with the anti-portfolio, the most brutal, difficult thing to talk about for angels. Tell us, Ed, the company that you had in your sights that you could have invested in or potentially invested in, and you absolutely blew it by turning them down and now have to stare at the ceiling at night and go, oh my God, I'm an idiot. I didn't invest in X, Y, and Z. Go ahead, and I'll give you mine after.
There are many examples of this.
Give us the most painful. I can see the most painful in your eyes. You're almost like unwilling to give it because it's so painful, but let's go for it. Let's go for it.
The one that stands out the most is a company called Checkr, Checkr.
Okay, Checkr.
Which is a background check company. So
amazing idea.
Yeah, so they basically are a service where they will check your background and see, have you had a criminal history, things like that. And that's used by companies when they hire employees.
Got it.
This was historically done through agencies, and it was very inefficient. So this company, Checkr, made it efficient. They did it through an API, through a technology interface, basically.
Got it. So you ping them with somebody's social or email or name, and they just give you back yay or nay.
That's right. So I met this company, I met the CEO. He graduated from Y Combinator. It was obviously, an expensive deal, right? The deal terms were, a little bit absurd. Yeah.
Uncapped, 20 million.
It was in that range. Yeah. And at the time, I just met the founder. It was literally a 30-minute decision that I had to make. It was very quick. Not a lot of time for diligence. That's the whole issue with companies that graduate from that particular accelerator, is you have to be able to make decisions on the spot. And
they've designed it as such, right? You put 600 investors in a room, you create this cattle call, and the top companies are obvious. And there's a bunch of dentists willing to put in 25K checks, so they could fill it up with just 50 25K checks.
Now, my gut told me that this is going to be a very successful company.
Right.
But my mind said, Ed, you should take your time and diligence this company and, be very thoughtful about your process. And in the time that I spent thinking about it, the deal filled up very, very quickly.
What was the time frame, roughly?
For this particular company, we're talking about, hours to days, basically. Wow. That's how fast this company filled up.
Under 48 hours.
Yeah. So in these kinds of situations, you have to put yourself in different contexts. So there are startups that I look at where I spend a month looking at the company alongside other angels, VCs, and we look at the competitive situation, and we look at who else is looking at this company right now. You can sometimes get clues about that, and that'll inform your process for how long it can take to actually make that investment decision. But then there's other situations where you have to be able to go with your gut and make a decision based on your personal experience. And the more years you spend as an investor and as an entrepreneur, the faster you'll be able to make a decision like that about whether this company, it has that venture class potential. And so for this situation, I made a misread on the speed at which that round would come together and how much time I had to actually do that evaluation.
And that's let's call it a 50x or 100x mistake, you think?
Yeah, it's in that range, for sure. I would not be surprised if they were in the billion plus range over time.
Yeah, makes total sense. I passed on Twitter. I wasn't really an angel investor, but I just thought, and I go through the story in the book, Angel, and it was just one of those things where I, as a writer of blog posts and having owned a blog company, thought allowing non-writers the ability to be on par with us writers, it was really a sin for me of being an elitist. I just thought, you're capable of writing a headline, you should not be allowed to write. You should have to form a paragraph, and you should have to put 4 paragraphs together and write a full 500 to 5,000 word piece. I just hated the concept and couldn't get my head around everybody just writing 140 characters and thinking that was meaningful.
Wow.
In fact, it disgusted me. I found it disgusting. I was like, this is like prostitution of, writing. This is just like you're just cheapening it. You took the love and you just made it about sex. It's just not a sophisticated approach. And that's a $50 million mistake for me.
I'll tell you another one. There's a company called Haven, Haven, and they are a technology platform for the container shipping industry.
Yummy.
So exactly. It sounds super boring, right? Well, sometimes
I love that boring.
Exactly. These super boring kind of B2B investments can sometimes give you the best returns. And at the time, this company had no progress at all. It was a CEO with no team and no traction. It was just a guy with an idea. And he had spent the last 9 months researching the market, doing his diligence, doing customer development, working with customers, understanding the market. And he was very thoughtful in his approach. And he's going after an incredibly large market. I mean, this is a multi-billion, actually potentially trillion-dollar market that he's going after with incredible defensibility at scale. If this business were to be created and scale, it would be a massive business. And so at the time, I was trying to be as selective as possible, trying to be very cautious as an investor. And I think, when you're early on in your angel investing career, you want to have access to that many deals initially. And it's almost like a learning experience when you invest, is that there's a certain amount of capital you have to spend as an investor to pay your dues and to learn. But if you're thoughtful about your approach, and if you're well networked, and if you collaborate with other investors, then with enough investments being made, you can actually make money and profit even as a very new angel investor. And so I was overly cautious at the time. I didn't think they had made enough progress. I passed. And this company is certainly going to be in the multi-billion-dollar range. 10% of the world's coffee now goes through this system right now.
Now, wait a second. You're still in touch with the founder. Why not ask him if you could put $250 in right now on a convertible note, uncapped?
We will see. So,
all right, yum, yum. Now we have something to work on after we do this.
And that's a lesson for other angels out there, is that just because you pass on a company doesn't necessarily mean that you can't invest down the road.
You can make up for your sin.
That's right.
That's one of the nice things here. It's not a fatal blow. You can go chase the company and say, you know what? I made a mistake. I could have gotten in at 10 million. I'm going to get in at 100 million.
That's right. And it's not necessarily, a lot of investors will say, well, because I missed out at 10 million, there's a 10x difference. Why would I invest at 100 million?
Because there might be 100 to come.
Exactly. You have to take your psychology out of it. You can't feel bad about missing out on the $10 million valuation.
Right.
That second bite at the apple is very important, because there are outsized returns that come from very few companies, and just being in the right deals, regardless of valuation, as long as they have a lot of upside to go, that's the right strategy.
I think this was Kleiner Perkins' strategy when they missed all these web companies. I remember reading that they had invested like $100 million in Twitter at a multi-billion-dollar valuation, and everybody was like, what idiots. Well, then, of course, it goes to 40 billion at the peak, or 45, maybe even 50 billion, and it looked like they're geniuses. But even at 15 billion, if they put 100 million in at 4 billion and they 4x'd 100 million, that's 400 million. It's $300 million in profits. The law of large numbers is significant. Take me to a company that failed. You can use the name or not use the name, depending on if you want to protect the innocent or how bad it was. That you are incredibly sad, frustrated, beside yourself, that it's gone, and that you really wanted it to exist in the world, and maybe it didn't need to fail. It could have succeeded. And if somebody came along with a 2.0 or another swing at the bat, you might actually have a propensity to embrace the same idea or founder.
That's a great question. It's a great question. So I won't mention the name here just to kind of protect the founders, but
and our ability to invest in the next time they go to bat.
That's right.
Let's keep that proprietary deal flow between us, Ed. Very well done.
But I'll describe at the high level what happened. So this company it was a marketplace business. It was in the pet services space.
Oh my goodness.
And I really believed in the idea, the concept, and the market opportunity. I introduced the founder to several investors, including VCs. One of the VCs who met them had a 1-hour meeting with that founder, came back and said, Ed, I can't work with this guy. He's just ridiculously too hard to work with.
Wow. After 1 hour?
After a 1-hour meeting, yeah.
They're like, this person's difficult.
That's right. And I ignored that advice, and I decided to invest anyway. And what's interesting is that over the next 3 years, I then assisted the company and helped the company. And it became very, very apparent that this VC's read on the company was very true, and that he was very hard to work with. And he was actually unable to attract follow-on financing for that reason.
Wow.
And what's interesting is that you hear a lot of stories about founders that are hard to work with. And you see stories about founders who have done very well for themselves despite being hard to work with.
I kind of look for that as a quality.
Yeah, exactly. And so there isn't necessarily a lesson learned here in terms of don't work with founders that are hard to work with.
Sure.
Because sometimes founders have to be a little bit crazy in order to succeed.
Right. And if somebody who is pursuing entrepreneurship, they might be like a film director or let's say a Hollywood actor or maybe a sports star. Like is LeBron James or Scorsese or Leonardo DiCaprio or George Clooney, are they easy to work with? I don't know. I don't work with them, but you would think maybe they're perfectionists. Maybe, they have some edge to them.
That's right.
But at a certain point, is likability an important factor in future follow-on investing? I'm curious what you think.
I mean, there's another company that I'm advising called Canva, which is, they're worth several $100 million right now. The founders are incredibly likable, and that has very much helped their fundraising process.
Canva, the company that allows you to make quick graphics
Yes.
on social media that look like Photoshop?
That's right, exactly.
Is that out of Australia?
Yeah.
You are an investor in that company?
I'm an advisor to the company.
Advisor. Oh, so you got equity for free for doing work.
It was, that's essentially it. Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. I talk about being an advisor in the book. Are they going to raise money? I mean, wow, man, I want to get in on
right now they're profitable. They don't need money. They haven't even spent
Where are
the
they,
money.
Sydney or Melbourne?
They're in actually they have multiple
Queensland?
locations right now.
Yeah.
So,
oh my goodness, I love Canva.
But going back to the story that we were talking about earlier,
likability.
There's a reason why I'm telling this story to the audience for this book, which is that as a new investor, if you have a loss and a company does not do well, the first reaction you might have is, let me look at why they failed and then learn a lesson from that and then not make that mistake again. That would be the natural reaction as a human being. What I'm here to tell you is that there aren't enough data points in your portfolio to make that determination. Mm. If I decided I'm not going to work with founders that are a little bit weird because this particular founder was a little bit weird, then I might miss out on the next Uber or the next huge company.
Uber's a perfect example. Travis is known for being a strong personality. Elon is known for being a strong personality. Larry Page, he's a kind of an introvert. He's a little bit weird.
That's
Sergey,
right.
Larry and Sergey were a little bit weird. Zuckerberg, complete introvert. I met Zuckerberg when he had a couple of cities or a couple of campuses. I would say he was very odd. Mm-hmm. Right? Like on an interpersonal relationship way, he was odd. And now even still with a huge company, when you hear him speak, it's a little bit weird. Like he's not like a person who's incredibly good at public speaking. So that's not a correlation, is it?
That's right. And so what I would encourage the audience to think about here is if you start off angel investing and if you take a loss, if let's say your first investment fails, I wouldn't necessarily look at that as a data point that should necessarily inform your thesis going forward because it's not enough data points within your limited portfolio. You have to have, dozens, hundreds of investments to make decisions like that. And so, part of investing is about failing. It's about taking losses, and that's okay. The biggest mistake you can make as an investor is to write too large a check, to put all your money into one company, have that company fail, and then say, I'm no longer doing this angel investing thing. It's too hard for me. It's not my thing. The right approach, in my opinion, is to take a portfolio approach where you're writing smaller checks into a large number of companies and look at it as an educational process for you to become a better investor, to be better informed, but also to form relationships with other investors and with entrepreneurs, which will improve your deal flow down the road. And then that's where your real returns will come from.
Amazing. And let's go to we'll end on a great success, something you've invested in, you're super proud of, being part of the team. What's something, it doesn't necessarily have to be your biggest return to date, but one where you just go, wow, I'm excited when I look at my portfolio and I see all the losses and I see the zombie companies and the singles and the doubles. This one, which is a triple or a home run, makes me feel good and keeps me motivated to do what I do.
So there's a few of them in my portfolio that I'm really proud of. AngelList is one of them. So I'm an investor in AngelList.
You're an investor in AngelList.
Yep.
What round?
It was a medium-sized round. It wasn't the first round.
$100 million first round, or second round, or whatever. Yeah. The Andreessen Horowitz round.
Yeah. And then I'm also an investor in a company called Alto. They are a prescription drug delivery service.
Oh, I love that company.
They're very much on the radar right now. Yeah. Not a lot of people have heard of them yet, but they have one of the best founders I've seen attacking a huge market opportunity. They recently raised a Series B, was very competitive. So that's going to certainly be in the kind of the $1 billion range over time. There's a company called NodeSource that I'm an investor in, this is a boring kind of B2B technology company. They're a programming company for software developers. And they're basically reinventing the programming industry around a technology called Node.js.
Sure, Node.
Which is a very technical programming concept that developers use, but it's taking over the world. It is the most popular language right now to build cloud applications. And so they're at the forefront of that. And so those are a few examples.
Great. Listen, Ed, it's been wonderful to have you here. It's great to work with you also. I think one of the nice things about what we do when you think about our jobs is we get to meet these amazing founders who want to change the world and maybe come on a journey with them. But also there's an esprit de corps, esprit de corps? Is that how you pronounce it? I don't know. I took French for 3 years. I don't know if I can pronounce everything. But there's this camaraderie. You know what I'm saying? There's like a camaraderie between us angel investors, and it's like working with you and having you come to my incubator and speak at our events. You've been really immense, and I have to say it's been great getting to know you and collaborate. I hope we have many more years of collaborating. It's great to see angel investors sharing the best practices. And if you look just downstream where the venture capitalists work, they're so at odds with each other. You notice that in the industry? They're always like bad-mouthing each other and swinging elbows?
I do notice that, and it's unfortunate because in our industry, and this is my approach to investing, I think it's yours as well, Jason, is that there's a lot more to be gained by being collaborative. This ecosystem is sometimes described as co-opetition, and that we're competing for investing in companies because there's limited allocations available, but there's also opportunities to cooperate. And if you look at your life as an investor over decades, and that's kind of how I look at my life, is that I love this thing. I'm never going to stop investing in startup companies. This is my thing. Those relationships that I form with others, with co-investors, with entrepreneurs, I optimize for those relationships over decades, not over the transaction. And so by being relationship-based, by being a little bit flexible about allocations, getting other investors to co-invest with you, to seek advice from other investors, that's really how I think you can excel as an investor, because there's a lot of people around the world with a lot more experience than you have, because everyone comes from a unique background. And by engaging with others, we can work together to make the best investment decisions.
Amazing. Well said, and I am in complete agreement. So many nuggets here that all I can do is thank you for taking the time and sharing them. And let's get back to making some deals. I can tell you, if you're listening to this, if only I could leave the microphone on for the 20 minutes that Ed and I will talk about deal flow, it would be so valuable. But what we do has to have some discretion. But I can promise you that the second this microphone goes off, we're going to be trading notes about amazing deals that are coming up, and we'll see you all next time.